Sri Lanka's defense minister says police have arrested 7 suspects believed to be linked to the wave of bombings that killed at least 190 people. The first 7 blasts targeted churches and luxury hotels in and near the capital, Colombo. A church in the eastern town of Batticaloa was also hit. One of the suspects was arrested on the outskirts of Colombo at the scene of an 8th explosion that killed 3 police as they attempted to search a house. Most of the casualties came from the church bombings where worshippers were celebrating Easter. The Prime Minister of Sri Lanka, Ranil Wickremesing, has been speaking about the attacks today. Let's have a listen.
I would like to express my condolences with the families of victims and those injured in the attacks that took place in the country today. I see this as a major crisis that will lead the country and its economy towards instability. I strongly condemn these attacks that targeted religious sites and luxury hotels. All of us must uphold the law of the land.
Let's cross over now to Jamila Najmuddin, editor of News in Asia and journalist in Colombo, Sri Lanka. At least 2 more blasts followed the earlier bombings today. What's the situation in and around Colombo now?
Yes, hello. So basically the latest information is that the security forces have arrested 7 people in connection with the 8 blasts which took place today. And security also has been beefed up across the island, especially in the places of worship. And an island-wide curfew has been imposed until further notice.
Do we have any information yet on the suspects arrested?
We do not have any information as to which organization these suspects belong to because the police are not divulging much to us. But we do know that 2 of the suspects are currently trapped in a house in Batticaloa where one of the explosions took place, and the police have surrounded the area.
Officials have imposed a social media ban in Sri Lanka following the bombings. What's the aim of that?
So basically, when the attacks to explosions took place today morning, there was a lot of misinformation which started coming out on social media, which spread panic and fear amongst the public. It was also igniting racism. So just a short while ago, President Maithripala Sirisena released a statement urging people not to release false information which would create further tension in the country. So the aim of this is basically to spread misinformation traveling out.
This is, of course, an ongoing operation. You talked about panic in the streets. What's the situation now?
Well, basically, the streets are deserted at the moment since there is a curfew in place until further notice. And those who wish to travel to the airport who have flights are requested to show their tickets and their passports at all the security checkpoints. So you do not see anybody on the roads at the moment except for the Thai forces.
You talked about the curfew. What other measures are officials implementing at the moment?
So, well, basically, the police have been dispatched outside all places of worship across the island and also outside all the star-class hotels in Colombo and the rest of the country. And there's a search and rescue operation going on by the authorities in all the explosion sites. That is the only information which we are hearing at the moment.
Sri Lanka's Christian community was hit particularly hard by these bombings. During his Easter Mass in the Vatican, Pope Francis condemned the violence. Let's listen in.
I heard with sadness the news of the horrendous attacks, which on Easter Sunday have brought sadness and pain to some churches and other places in Sri Lanka. I would like to express my heartfelt closeness to the Christian community, which was attacked while gathered in prayer, and to all victims of such a cruel act of violence. I entrust to the Lord all who so tragically died, and I pray for the wounded and all those who are suffering because of this dramatic event.
Let's get back to Jamila Najmuddin covering the story on the ground. Jamila, we've heard about explosions at churches, at hotels, in residential areas. Did this attack have a clear target?
Well, initially, when the attacks did happen on Sunday morning, it took place in three very popular churches across the island. That is one church, the St. Anthony's Church in capital Colombo, the St. Sebastian's Church in Negombo, just outside the capital, and the Zion Church in Batticaloa in the eastern province. So initially, what everybody assumed was that it was the Catholic community which was targeted in these attacks. But just within a short span of time, then there were also multiple attacks in star-class hotels in Colombo, where foreigners were also targeted. So the exact motive behind these attacks are yet to be revealed.
This is something that we already know, the worst violence in Sri Lanka since the end of the civil war 10 years ago. What can you tell us about the threats facing the country at the moment?
Well, basically, when the war ended in 2009, we were getting back to normal. You see, this is the 10th year since the end of the war. In fact, in May, we will be celebrating 10 years since the war ended. We were getting back on track where the security level was also minimized to a great extent. But with these attacks today, security has been beefed up to the maximum, and it is likely to stay like that at least for the coming weeks.
Only 7% of Sri Lanka's population is Christian. They were, of course, at the center of these attacks, even if they weren't the only target. Have there been other attacks against this religious minority in the past? Briefly, if you can.
Yes, there has been attacks against the minorities in the past. For example, on Palm Sunday last week, there was an attack at the Methodist Church in Anuradhapura, which is in the central province. And then just a few months ago, there were also attacks in Bigana against the minority Muslims. But the government was successful in providing safeguarding these minorities. So this attack comes as a total surprise to all the minorities as well.
Jamila Najmuddin, thank you very much.
Thank you.
A short while ago, I spoke to Asanga Abeyagunasekera, head of the Institute of National Security Studies in Colombo, Sri Lanka. He was in one of the hotels in Sri Lanka's capital that were targeted in today's attacks. He told us about what he witnessed.
It was in the Shangri-La Hotel, and so there was at 8:35 the initial blast went off, and then I was on my way down to the breakfast area. So that's where it happened. So the table one was the breakfast area where all the people were having breakfast, and most of them were celebrating their Easter. And so there was a lot of foreigners, and there was so many victims from that, and I witnessed most of them. And actually, the military barracks or the military defense headquarters was right next to the Shangri-La Hotel, and you could see, amazingly, there was a lot of assistance coming from the military, and who was running in while we were walking out of the building. There was military running in to assist, and there were so many casualties. So in there. And there was simultaneously there was bombs from everywhere, like seven other bombs from in different places in Sri Lanka. And from 2017 March, we've been sort of highlighting our institute has been Institute of National Security Studies have been highlighting there is a serious threat on the violent extremism groups. There are so many groups who are involved in Sri Lanka, and there could be a threat, serious, significant threat coming into Sri Lanka. And this sort of, if you take the targeted attacks in the St. Anthony's Church is one of the most popular churches for the Christians to come, even from the villages. They come in there, and you could see many victims from that church attack and many other churches.
That was Asanga Abeyagunasekera, head of the Institute of National Security Studies in Colombo, Sri Lanka. He spoke to us earlier by phone. Let me quickly bring you up to speed on the story we've been following for you this hour. Officials now say at least 207 people have been killed and hundreds injured in explosions at churches and hotels in Sri Lanka. The first 7 explosions hit Colombo as well as the town of Negombo and Batticaloa in the east of the country. A major church in Colombo was among the buildings hit. Other targets were 5-star hotels. The defense minister says 7 suspects have been arrested. For more analysis, let's bring in DW's Sonia Falnikar in our studio in Delhi. Sonia, people around the world are following events in Sri Lanka. What's been the reaction so far in India and other countries in the region?
So, well, there's really been a flood of statements here across the Asian subcontinent, across the Indian subcontinent, really condemning these attacks. Now, here in India, of course, which is a neighbor of Sri Lanka's and a crucial ally, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has, issued a press release. He's also tweeted saying there is no place for barbarism in our region. He says he strongly condemns the blast. He said India stands in solidarity with Sri Lanka. India's Foreign Minister Sushma Swaraj says, she's been in touch with the Indian High Commission in Colombo. She says she's monitoring the situation very closely. Her ministry has also tweeted helplines for Indian nationals who are trapped in Sri Lanka.
This incident recalls other attacks we've seen in recent years in the region. In 2016, 75 people were killed in an Easter Sunday bombing targeting Christians in Lahore, Pakistan. What parallels are there between these incidents?
Well, I have to say that so far, really, no group has really claimed responsibility for these attacks in Sri Lanka. And so I think we know very little at this point about who was really behind that, what the motive was. In terms of parallels, I mean, the Indian subcontinent is really no stranger to terror attacks. Closer home in India, if you remember back in Mumbai in 2008, we had a terrorist attack, but across multiple sites in the financial capital. But as far as parallels go, I think we can say that all these attacks have been very unexpected in that they have taken authorities by surprise. They have seemed to be very well coordinated and well planned. That was the case in Mumbai too. These attacks have also claimed a very high death toll. In Mumbai, if you remember, in 2008, 174 people died. So yeah, there are certainly parallels in that sense. But I think if you look at Sri Lanka and the context there, we have to remember that there has been really a major, a lull in major violence really since the end of the civil war in Sri Lanka in 2009. Now, there has been some sporadic violence between members of the majority Buddhist Sinhalese community and the Muslim minority in Sri Lanka. So much so that last March, Sri Lanka did, impose an emergency because of clashes between the Buddhist Sinhalese and the Muslim minority. But I think it's really safe to say that since the end of the civil war, since the defeat of the Tamil Tigers in 2009, we really haven't seen an incident of this kind in Sri Lanka.
Sonia Falnikar, thank you for your analysis.